In front of a grave with no body, a devastated millionaire faces the emptiness of having lost his only son to the sea. But in the middle of the rain and sorrow, an unknown girl approaches holding a small child's shoe. With steady eyes, she delivers a sentence that makes his world collapse. "Your son is alive." And from that unlikely encounter, a story of love, hope, and transformation begins. If you love great stories, please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're from. We continue. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of raindrops falling ceaselessly on the cold marble. Robert Caldwell stood there, his gaze lost, completely devastated before his son's symbolic headstone. There was no body, no real goodbye, just a ceremony marked by absence and despair. It had been 3 months since the accident occurred, a boat trip interrupted by a violent storm, off the coast of Maine. Robert, saved by a miracle, never managed to find his son, who had been swept away by the turbulent waters. All that remained was a small child's sneaker, caught in branches along the shore, the only trace of the boy. The rain had been relentless for days, as if the skies themselves were mourning alongside him. Robert didn't bother with an umbrella. The cold droplets mixing with his tears seemed fitting somehow. His expensive suit was soaked through, but he couldn't bring himself to care. What was the point of material comforts now? His 10-year-old son, Michael, was gone. From that day forward, his life had plunged into an abyss. Nothing made sense anymore. The fortune he had built over decades as one of America's leading software developers now seemed useless and empty. His mansion in Portland's exclusive West End neighborhood, once full of life, had become somber. Each room brought painful memories. Michael's bedroom untouched, his toys still scattered as if he might return any minute to play with them. His company, Caldwell Tech, an empire that took years to build, was completely neglected. He no longer attended meetings, didn't respond to emails, and even refused to eat properly. The pain of losing his son was compounded by another old wound. Years earlier, he had also lost his wife, Emily, to a sudden illness. Now, there was no one left. The empire he had built, the wealth he had accumulated, what was it all for if he had no one to share it with? "Mr. Caldwell," a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Pastor Williams, who had officiated the memorial service. "Everyone has left. Perhaps you should come inside out of the rain." Robert nodded absently but made no move to follow. "I need some time alone, Pastor. Thank you for everything today." The elderly man squeezed his shoulder gently. "Take all the time you need. God works in mysterious ways, Robert. Sometimes when we think all hope is lost, life surprises us." Those words, meant to comfort, only twisted the knife deeper. What mysterious ways could justify taking a child from his father? What divine plan could possibly make sense of such cruelty? Between tears and despair, he questioned daily the reasons for life, the meaning of so much suffering. At night, he would hold that child's sneaker against his chest, as if somehow the object could bring his son back. And, ironically, it was hope that tortured him most. The absence of a body prevented his heart from fully accepting the loss. Every day he woke up with a cruel thought. What if, somehow, his son was alive? Robert's assistant, Nancy, had tried everything to help him cope. She arranged for grief counselors, suggested support groups, even threatened to quit if he didn't start taking care of himself. His business partner, Thomas, had stepped in to keep the company running, but Caldwell Tech was suffering without its visionary founder. The board was getting restless, shareholders were concerned, but none of that mattered to Robert. As the rain continued to fall, Robert finally turned away from the memorial stone. The cemetery was empty now, everyone having retreated to their cars to escape the downpour. He had insisted on driving himself, refusing the chauffeur who had been with him for 15 years. Today, he wanted no buffer between himself and his pain. Walking back to his car, a sleek black Tesla that Michael had always been fascinated by, Robert made an impulsive decision. He didn't want to return to the emptiness of his mansion. Not yet. Not with the sound of the memorial service still echoing in his ears, the pitying looks of friends and colleagues still fresh in his mind. Instead of heading home, Robert drove aimlessly through the streets of Portland. without security, without luxury cars, without anyone. He wanted to feel the world again, perhaps hoping that the wind or rain would take away some of his pain. He drove for hours, eventually abandoning his car in a parking lot and continuing on foot, wandering through neighborhoods he'd never set foot in before. The pristine streets of the West End gave way to the working-class areas of Bayside and Kennedy Park. Robert walked without purpose, his expensive shoes splashing through puddles, his tailored suit clinging to him like a second skin. People hurried past with umbrellas and raincoats, few giving him a second glance despite his obviously expensive attire so out of place in this part of town. As evening approached, the rain finally began to ease, though the sky remained heavy with clouds. Robert found himself in a run-down neighborhood near the waterfront, where fishing boats and commercial vessels docked. The smell of salt and fish hung in the air, reminding him painfully of Michael's love for the sea. How many weekends had they spent on their boat, exploring the coastline, fishing and diving? The memories threatened to overwhelm him. Lost in thought, Robert barely registered the small figure darting out from between two buildings. It was only when the child crashed directly into him that he was jolted back to awareness. "I'm sorry, mister." The voice belonged to a girl, perhaps 11 or 12 years old, thin and fragile-looking, with wet clothes and no shoes on her feet. She looked up at him with wide, startled eyes. "It's all right," Robert replied automatically, steadying the child. "Are you okay? Where are your shoes? It's too cold to be barefoot." The girl didn't answer his question. Instead, she stared at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Are you Mr. Caldwell?" she asked, her voice suddenly urgent. "The man from the news, the one who lost his son?" Robert felt his chest tighten. "Yes, I am," he answered cautiously. "How did you—" But before he could finish, the girl reached into the pocket of her worn jacket and pulled out something that made Robert's world stop spinning. A small sneaker, blue and white, with a distinctive scuff mark on the toe, identical to the one he kept by his bedside. The other shoe of the pair that had been found on the day of the accident. His legs weakened instantly. He reached out with trembling hands, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice breaking. The girl looked around nervously, then back at Robert. Her next words would change everything. "I know where your son is, Mr. Caldwell," she said with unexpected certainty. "He's alive." Robert's world tilted on its axis. The rain, the cold, the entire neighborhood seemed to fade away, leaving only the girl and the sneaker she held in her small hand. His mind rejected the information instantly. It was impossible. It had to be some cruel joke, or worse, an attempt at extortion. He'd heard stories of scammers preying on grieving families. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you get this?" The girl clutched the sneaker protectively to her chest. "My name is Emma Sullivan. And I'm not lying, Mr. Caldwell. I've seen your son. I know where he is." Robert studied her face, searching for signs of deception. But all he found was earnestness and something else. Fear, perhaps. Her clothes were worn and damp, her hair a tangled mess of brown curls. She looked underfed and anxious, shifting her weight from one bare foot to the other on the cold, wet pavement. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Robert asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside him. "That sneaker. It could have washed up anywhere along the coast." Emma shook her head vigorously. "It didn't wash up. He was wearing it when my dad found him." A painful hope flared in Robert's chest, so intense it felt like physical agony. "Your father found a boy. When? Where?" 3 weeks ago, Emma replied, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being overheard. "Dad works on the docks. He was checking some traps early one morning and he found a boy. He was confused, scared. Couldn't remember much except his first name. Michael." Robert breathed the name like a prayer. Emma nodded. "He had this shoe, the other one was gone. Dad took him home because he was freezing and didn't know where he belonged. We tried asking around, but—" She hesitated. "We don't exactly get along with the police around here, and Michael was terrified of being taken away. He begged us not to tell anyone." Robert's mind raced, trying to piece together how this could be possible. The storm had hit their boat just off the coast. Search and rescue teams had combed the area for days. How could Michael have survived? And if he had, why couldn't he remember? "I need to see him," Robert said urgently, grabbing Emma's shoulders. "Please, take me to him." Emma stepped back, looking uncertain. "That's why I came to find you. He's gone." "Gone?" Robert felt the hope that had been building crash down around him. "What do you mean, gone?" "This morning, Dad was reading the newspaper. There was an article about you, about the memorial service you were having today." Emma's words tumbled out quickly now. "There was a picture of you. When Michael saw it, something happened. It was like a light went on. He remembered you. He remembered his home. He got really excited, but then really sad. He wrote a note and said he was going to wait at the place where you two used to spend time together, a special place." Robert's heart thundered in his chest. There was only one place that could be, the small lighthouse on the point, where he and Michael would go every Sunday to watch the boats. It was their tradition, their special time together. "I need to go there," Robert said, already turning. "I need to go now." "Wait," Emma called, grabbing his sleeve. "Let my dad explain. He can tell you everything. Our place is just around the corner." Robert hesitated, torn between rushing to the lighthouse and hearing the full story. Logic won. Out. He needed to understand what happened, how Michael had survived and why he couldn't remember. "Take me to your father," he agreed. Emma led him through narrow streets, past weathered buildings with peeling paint and sagging porches. They turned down an alley and approached a small structure that could barely be called a house, more of a makeshift shelter constructed of scavenged wood, metal sheets, and tarps. "It's not much," Emma said apologetically, noticing Robert's expression, "but it's home." She pushed aside a piece of plastic serving as a door and called out, Dad, I found him. I found Michael's father." A man appeared from the shadows of the tiny dwelling. He was tall and lean, with weathered skin and wary eyes. His clothes were worn but clean, his posture suggesting both physical strength and emotional exhaustion. "James Sullivan," he introduced himself, extending a rough, calloused hand. "You must be the Caldwell fellow from the paper." Robert shook his hand automatically, still trying to process his surroundings. How could people live like this, just miles from his mansion? "Where's my son?" Robert demanded, his voice breaking. "Emma says you found him." James gestured for Robert to sit on one of two rickety chairs. "You might want to take a seat, it's quite a story." Robert remained standing. "Just tell me, please." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. 3 weeks back, I was checking. Some crab traps at dawn. There'd been a small boat that washed up on the rocks a day before, all smashed up, no one inside. I thought maybe I'd find something worth salvaging." He paused, seeing Robert's expression. "I'm not proud of it, but times are tough." "Go on," Robert urged. "That's when I heard something. A kid's voice calling for help." I followed the sound to a small cave in the cliffside, only accessible at low tide. And there he was, this boy shivering, soaking wet, confused as hell. Only had one shoe on, said his name was Michael, but couldn't tell me much else. Seemed like he'd hit his head pretty bad. Robert sank into the chair, his legs no longer able to support him. "Why didn't you take him to a hospital or the police?" James shifted uncomfortably. "I tried at first, but the kid went into a complete panic, started screaming, thrashing around. Said he didn't want to go back there. I couldn't force him, he was traumatized enough, so I brought him here, got him warm, fed him, figured I'd try again when he calmed down." "But he never did?" Robert asked. "He did calm down, but the amnesia stayed. He remembered bits and pieces, said he liked boats, remembered swimming, knew his age, but no last name, no address. I asked around discreetly, but no one had reported a missing kid matching his description in our immediate area." Robert looked incredulous. "My son has been missing for 3 months. It was all over the news." James spread his hands apologetically. "We don't exactly have cable TV here, Mr. Caldwell. No internet either. And like I said, we try to keep a low profile with authorities." He hesitated. "I've had troubles in the past. Nothing serious, just some misunderstandings with the law. I was afraid if I walked into a police station with a kid that wasn't mine, they'd assume the worst. Robert took a deep breath, trying to process everything. And this morning, Emma said he saw my picture. James nodded. I was at the corner store, picked up a newspaper. Your face was on the front page, something about a memorial service for your son. Michael just happened to see it, and it was like someone flipped a switch, started saying, "That's my dad, that's my dad." Then he got real quiet, thinking hard. Said he remembered everything now, who he was, where he lived. But instead of being happy, he looked scared. Scared? Why would he be scared? He wouldn't say exactly, just kept mumbling something about a promise and needing to go to their spot. He wrote this note, then took off before I could stop him. James reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Robert took it with trembling hands. The handwriting was unmistakably Michael's, slightly messy but deliberate, just as his teacher had described it at their last parent-teacher conference. "Dad," the note read, "I remember everything now. I'm going to our special place, the one where we count boats on Sundays. I'll wait for you there. I'm sorry I broke my promise. Please come find me. Michael." The promise. Robert knew exactly what Michael meant. The last time they'd gone sailing, Michael had begged to take the wheel. Robert had reluctantly agreed, making Michael promise to give the wheel back if the weather changed. When the storm hit suddenly, Michael had panicked, frozen at the controls, unable to relinquish them as promised. In those critical seconds before Robert could take over, the boat had veered dangerously, eventually capsizing. Robert had always assumed Michael blamed himself for the accident. "I need to go to him," Robert said, standing abruptly. "He's waiting at the lighthouse on Porter Point. He thinks I blame him for what happened." "I'll take you," James offered. "My truck isn't much, but it'll get us there faster than walking." Robert hesitated only briefly before nodding. 20 minutes ago he wouldn't have trusted this stranger. Now this man was the reason his son might still be alive. They hurried outside where an ancient pickup truck sat parked on the street. Emma climbed into the middle of the bench seat, with Robert taking the passenger side and James behind the wheel. The engine protested before reluctantly rumbling to life. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, Robert turned to Emma. "How did you know who I was? How did you find me at the cemetery?" Emma exchanged a glance with her father before answering. "After Michael left, Dad and I were worried. We saw in the paper where the memorial was happening. We figured you'd be there. I waited across the street watching. When everyone left and you started walking alone, I followed you. I wanted to give you the sneaker and tell you about Michael, but I was scared. It took me hours to work up the courage." Robert felt a wave of gratitude so profound it brought fresh tears to his eyes. This girl and her father, who had so little themselves, had cared for his son when he needed it most, and now they were helping reunite them, asking nothing in return. As the truck made its way toward Porter Point, the rain began to ease and a sliver of golden light broke through the clouds on the horizon. For the first time in 3 months, Robert Caldwell felt something stir inside him, something that felt dangerously like hope. The old pickup truck rumbled along the coastal road, wipers fighting against the diminishing rain. Inside, Robert clutched the small sneaker in his hands, turning it over repeatedly, as if searching for further proof that this miracle could be real. The leather seat beneath him was cracked and worn, the dashboard held together with duct tape, a stark contrast to the luxury vehicles he was accustomed to. But in this moment, this battered truck was more precious than any Bentley or Ferrari in his collection. "So you just took him in?" Robert asked, breaking the tense silence. "A boy you found with no questions asked?" James kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. "Not exactly. I asked plenty of questions. He just didn't have many answers." He glanced briefly at Robert. "Look, Mr. Caldwell, I know how this must seem to someone like you. People in your world probably can't imagine why I wouldn't go straight to the authorities." "My world?" Robert echoed. "The world where people trust the system because it works for them," James replied simply. "Where calling the police means help arrives, not more trouble. Where social services are a safety net, not a threat." Emma leaned forward from between them. Dad spent 2 years in foster care when he was a kid. It wasn't good. And she hesitated, looking at her father. Emma was almost taken from me 3 years ago, James explained, his voice tight. Her mother left when she was 4. I raised her alone, doing whatever work I could find. One winter I couldn't afford heat. Teacher noticed Emma was always cold, called CPS. I almost lost her over a heating bill. Robert felt a twist of shame. How many times had he complained about the thermostat being a degree too low in his climate-controlled mansion? So when Michael panicked at the mention of authorities, James continued, I understood. Sometimes kids have reasons to be afraid. That adults don't understand. I figured I'd give him time, earn his trust, then figure out where he belonged. The truck crested a hill, and Porter Point Lighthouse came into view, standing tall against the darkening sky. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving everything glistening and clean. A rainbow arched over the horizon, its colors vivid, against the grey clouds. There it is, Robert whispered, his heart pounding. Our special place. James pulled into the small parking area near the base of the lighthouse. Robert was out of the truck before it fully stopped, rushing toward the white stone structure that had been a sanctuary for him and Michael every Sunday for years. Wait, Emma called, jumping out after him. There's something else you should know. But Robert couldn't wait. Not now. Not when Michael might be just a few 100 feet away. He ran up the winding path, his expensive shoes slipping on the wet stones. The lighthouse was technically closed to the public after the memorial service, but the gate stood partially open. Robert pushed through, heading for the small bench on the cliff's edge where he and Michael always sat to count the boats returning to harbor. As he rounded the lighthouse, his steps faltered. There on the bench sat a small figure, shoulders hunched against the sea breeze. Even from behind, Robert would know him anywhere. The way he sat, the slight tilt of his head, the sandy brown hair that needed a trim, just like always. Michael? He called, his voice barely audible over the crash of waves below. The boy stiffened, then slowly turned. For one eternal moment, father and son stared at each other across a distance that seemed both infinite and non-existent. Michael's face, thinner, paler but undeniably his, crumpled with emotion. Dad? He whispered. And then he was running, and Robert was running too, dropping to his knees as Michael crashed into his arms. They collided in a tangle of tears and desperate hugs, Robert clutching his son so tightly he was afraid he might hurt him, but unable to loosen his grip. Michael sobbed against his shoulder, small hands gripping Robert's soaked suit jacket. I'm sorry, Dad, Michael hiccuped between sobs. I'm so sorry. It was my fault. I didn't let go of the wheel like I promised. I got scared and— No, Robert interrupted, pulling back just enough to look into his son's face, to cup those dear cheeks in his trembling hands. It wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. It was the storm, Michael. Just the storm. Michael's blue eyes, so like his mother's, were swimming with tears. But you fell in the water, and then I fell too, and we got separated, and I couldn't find you. I looked for you everywhere, Robert said, his voice breaking. The Coast Guard searched for days. How did you survive? Where have you been all this time? Michael's expression clouded, confusion evident in his furrowed brow. I don't remember everything. It's like pieces of a puzzle that don't fit together. He took a deep breath. I remember being in the water, trying to swim, but the waves were too big. Then something hit my head and everything went dark. James and Emma had caught up now, standing a respectful distance away, watching the reunion with tear-filled eyes. The next thing I remember is waking up in a cave, Michael continued. I was cold and scared and my head hurt really bad. I knew my name was Michael, but his voice faltered. I couldn't remember anything else, not where I lived, not my last name, just pieces. I remembered I liked boats. I remembered counting them with someone important, but not who. Robert pulled Michael close again, as if afraid he might disappear. Over his son's shoulder, he met James's gaze and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." Mr. Sullivan found me, Michael explained, his voice muffled against Robert's chest. He brought me to their house. Well, it's not really a house, but they took care of me. Emma shared her food with me even though they don't have much. Mr. Sullivan gave me his bed and slept on the floor. Robert felt humbled by this generosity from people who had so little to give. They asked if I wanted to go to the hospital or the police, Michael continued, but I got really scared. I don't know why, it was like my brain was telling me it wasn't safe. He pulled back to look at his father. Is that weird? Robert shook his head. No, son. After trauma, sometimes our brains protect us in strange ways. The doctors call it amnesia. That's what Mr. Sullivan said, Michael nodded. He said my memories might come back if we gave them time. And they did. This morning, when I saw your picture in the newspaper, it all came flooding back. Well, not everything, but enough. I remembered you and our house and Mom. His voice trailed off. And you came here, Robert finished for him, to our special place. Michael nodded. I knew you'd find me here. Even if you thought I was gone, I knew when you saw that note, you'd come. His face crumpled again. But I was scared too, scared you might be mad at me for breaking my promise on the boat. Michael, Robert said firmly, holding his son's shoulders, I could never be mad at you for that, never. When I thought I'd lost you, nothing else mattered. Not the company, not the house, not anything. Just you. For several minutes they simply held each other, the lighthouse casting its lengthening shadow over them as the sun began to set. Finally Robert stood, keeping one arm firmly around Michael's shoulders, and turned to face James and Emma. I don't know how to thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. What you've done for my son, for me, there's no way I can ever repay that. James shook his head. Anyone would have done the same. No, Robert said firmly, not anyone. You took in a child who needed help, even when it put you at risk. You cared for him when you barely had enough for yourselves. That's not something just anyone would do. Emma approached tentatively, holding out the other sneaker she'd been carrying. I thought he might want this back. We've been keeping it safe. Michael took the sneaker, looking at the matching pair with a small smile. These were my favorites. Mom got them for me before she... He trailed off, looking at his father. Before she left us, Robert finished gently, the old pain mixing with the new joy in his heart. Michael nodded, then turned to Emma. Thanks for taking care of them, and for taking care of me. He hesitated, then asked, Can Emma and Mr. Sullivan come back to our house? I promised to show Emma my books. She loves reading, but they don't have many books. Robert looked at James, questioningly. The man seemed uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. We don't want to impose, James began, but Robert cut him off. Please, come back with us. It's the least I can do. We can have dinner, and... He hesitated, realizing how presumptuous it might sound, and we can talk more. I want to hear everything about these past weeks, how Michael has been, what you've been doing to help him. After a moment's hesitation, James nodded. All right, for dinner. As they walked back to the truck, Michael's hand firmly in his, Robert, felt as though he were walking in a dream. Just hours ago, he had been standing at an empty memorial, his life shattered beyond repair. Now his son was beside him, alive and whole. The universe had shifted on its axis, rearranging itself into something miraculous. They drove back toward Portland in the gathering dusk, Michael sitting between Robert and Emma in the back seat, the children quietly sharing stories as if they'd known each other for years instead of weeks. Robert listened, mesmerized by the sound of his son's voice, a sound he had thought he would never hear again. When they reached the outskirts of the city, Michael began pointing out landmarks, his memory clearly returning more fully. That's where my school is, he said, indicating a large brick building. And down that road is where Mum used to take me for ice cream on Saturdays. Each remembered detail was a gift, a confirmation that Michael was truly coming back to himself. But there were still gaps, moments when he would start to say something, then furrow his brow in confusion. The doctors will want to examine you, Robert said gently, to make sure you're okay and to help with the memory gaps. Michael tensed beside him. Will they have to take me away from you? No, never, Robert assured him quickly. I'll be with you the whole time. We'll go together whenever you're ready. They drove through the gates of Robert's estate in the West End. He was acutely aware of James's and Emma's reactions. The truck seemed to shrink as it moved up the long, curved driveway toward the sprawling mansion. Emma's eyes widened as she took in the manicured grounds, the fountain in the circular drive, the imposing stone facade of the house itself. "You live here," she breathed, pressing her face to the window. "It's like a castle." Michael smiled, some of his old confidence returning. "Wait till you see inside. I have a treehouse in the backyard too, and a telescope in my room. I can show you the stars later if it stops raining." As they pulled up to the front entrance, the door opened and Nancy, Robert's assistant, rushed out, her face a mask of confusion at the sight of the battered pickup truck. But when she saw Michael climbing out, her hand flew to her mouth, her professional composure shattered. "Michael!" she gasped, frozen in place. "Oh my God, Michael!" And then there were more tears, more hugs, more exclamations of disbelief and joy. Through it all, Robert kept one hand on his son's shoulder, as if afraid that if he let go, Michael might vanish like a dream upon waking. As they all moved toward the house, Robert caught James's eye over the children's heads. In that look passed a world of understanding, the shared knowledge of what it means to protect a child at all costs, the recognition of a fundamental human connection that transcended their vastly different circumstances. "Welcome to our home," Robert said simply. James nodded, the weight of the invitation not lost on him. "Thank you," he replied, equally simply. And as they crossed the threshold together, something shifted in the atmosphere, a sense that life would never be the same, for any of them, again. The entrance hall of the Caldwell mansion gleamed with polished marble and tasteful opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over museum-quality artwork and antique furniture that Emily had carefully selected during their 15 years of marriage. To Robert, it had become a mausoleum of memories, each perfect object a reminder of what he had lost. Now, seeing it through the eyes of James and Emma Sullivan, he realized how overwhelming it must appear. Emma stood frozen, just inside the doorway, afraid to touch anything, her worn sneakers leaving faint damp marks on the pristine floor. James looked equally uncomfortable, his weathered hands hanging awkwardly at his sides, as if he couldn't find a natural way to hold them in such surroundings. "It's okay," Michael said, taking Emma's hand. "You can touch stuff. Dad never yells." "About that? Only about running inside or leaving the fridge open?" Robert smiled at his son's casual demolition of any pretense of formality. "Leave it to a 10-year-old to cut through tension with unvarnished truth." "Michael's right," he confirmed. "Please make yourselves comfortable. This is a home, not a museum, despite appearances." Nancy, still looking shell-shocked, hovered nearby. "Mr. Caldwell, should I call Dr. Peterson and the authorities? They'll need to know that Michael is—" She caught herself glancing at the boy. "That Michael has returned." Robert nodded. "Yes, but not right this minute. First, we all need to get dry and have something to eat." He turned to James and, "Emma, would you like to clean up? I can find some dry clothes for both of you." James hesitated, pride warring with practicality. "That's kind of you, but—" "Dad," Emma interrupted, tugging at his sleeve and whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I'm really wet and cold, and I think my feet are turning blue." James looked down at his daughter's bare feet, which were indeed bluish at the toes, and his resistance crumbled. "All right, thank you, Mr. Caldwell." "Please call me Robert," he insisted, then turned to his assistant. "Nancy, could you show Emma to the guest room in the East Wing? There should be some of my niece's clothes in the closet from her last visit, and James can use the guest suite next door. Michael's clothes might be too small, but I think my things would fit." As Nancy led them upstairs, Robert took Michael to his room, which had remained untouched since the accident. Seeing his son step back into that space, running his fingers over his model ships, picking up the baseball signed by his favorite Red Sox player, flopping onto his bed with a familiar bounce, was surreal. It was as if the universe had granted Robert a second chance at life itself. "Dad?" Michael asked as he changed into dry clothes. "Are Emma and Mr. Sullivan going to stay with us?" Robert paused, considering. "For tonight, certainly. After that, we'll have to see. Would you like that?" Michael nodded vigorously. "Emma's my friend. She shared her food with me even when she was hungry. And Mr. Sullivan is nice. He tells good stories and taught me how to fix things." Robert felt a pang, imagining his son in that makeshift shelter, being cared for by people who had so little themselves. "They've been very good to you, haven't they?" "Yeah," Michael said thoughtfully. "They don't have much stuff, but they have other things. Important things." "What kind of important things?" Robert asked, curious about his son's perspective. Michael scrunched his face in concentration. "They laugh a lot, and they help each other, and they're not scared about not having things." He looked up at his father. "Mr. Sullivan says things are just things, but people are everything." The simple wisdom hit Robert like a physical blow. Wasn't that exactly what he had learned during these 3 months of hell? That his wealth meant nothing without his son, Mr. Sullivan is a very wise man, Robert said softly. Downstairs, Nancy had rallied the household staff, reduced during Robert's period of grief, but still consisting of a cook, a housekeeper, and a groundskeeper. The kitchen was now a flurry of activity, as a proper meal was prepared for the first time in months. When James and Emma came downstairs, they were transformed. Emma wore a simple blue dress that was slightly too large but clean and warm, her hair combed and falling in damp curls around her shoulders. James had reluctantly accepted a pair of Robert's casual pants and a sweater, looking uncomfortable, but significantly more at ease than in his wet clothes. "You look different," Michael observed, as Emma entered the kitchen where he was already, sitting at the counter watching the cook prepare dinner. "Like a princess or something." Emma blushed furiously. "I do not. It's just a dress." "A very pretty dress," Robert agreed, entering behind them. "My niece, Olivia, will be pleased it's being put to good." Shasti the cook, Mrs. Hernandez, who had been with the family since before Michael was born, couldn't stop wiping tears from her eyes as she worked. She kept pausing to touch Michael's hair or cheek, as if reassuring herself he was real. "Dios. Mio, it's a miracle," she kept saying. "A true miracle." Dinner was a curious affair. Roast chicken, potatoes and vegetables served on fine china in the informal dining room, which was still more elegant than any restaurant James or Emma had likely visited. Emma watched carefully as Michael used his silverware, then mimicked his movements. James ate slowly, with careful precision, like a man accustomed to making every bite count. The conversation flowed more easily than Robert had expected. Michael, with a child's resilience, seemed to be settling back into his home as if he'd never left, though occasional moments of confusion or hesitation revealed the lingering effects of his trauma. He regaled them with stories of his time with the Sullivans, learning to check crab traps, helping Emma collect recyclables to exchange for a few dollars, listening to James's stories by candlelight when the electricity in their shelter was cut off. "I've never fixed anything before," Michael told his father excitedly, "but Mr. Sullivan showed me how to repair a radio we found, and it worked. We listened to music on it every night." James smiled, a flash of pride crossing his weathered features. "Michael's a natural with his hands, quick learner too." "He always has been," Robert agreed, watching his son with wonder. "His teachers say he's mechanically inclined. I've been so focused on preparing him to take over the company someday that I may have overlooked that talent." James looked surprised. "Your company, Caldwell Tech, right? What exactly do you do there?" Robert realized that in all the chaos he'd never properly explained his business. "We develop software for financial systems, banking platforms, investment algorithms, that sort of thing. Not very exciting to a 10-year-old, I'm afraid." "Is that why you never let me visit your office?" Michael asked. "Because it's boring." Robert laughed, the sound foreign to his own ears after months without mirth. "Partly, and partly because I was always busy with meetings and calls. I didn't want you to sit around waiting for me to finish working." A flash of understanding passed between the two fathers, the universal challenge of balancing work and parenthood, regardless of which end of the economic spectrum one occupied. As dessert was served, a hastily assembled but delicious apple crisp, Robert noticed Emma stifling a yawn. The events of the day had clearly taken their toll on all of them. "Perhaps we should all get some rest," he suggested. "It's been an extraordinary day." Nancy, who had been quietly making calls from the next room, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Caldwell, I've spoken with Dr. Peterson. He's coming by tomorrow morning to check on Michael, and I've notified the authorities that he's been found. They'll want statements, but they agreed it can wait until tomorrow, given the circumstances." Robert nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Nancy. You've always known exactly what needs to be done." She smiled, her professional demeanor softening. "That's my job, sir. And may I say it's the happiest day of my career." She looked at James and Emma. "All thanks to you both." James shifted uncomfortably at the praise. "We just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Robert repeated his earlier sentiment. "What you did goes beyond common decency. You took in a child who needed help, at personal risk to yourself, when you could barely meet your own needs." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "James, I'd like to help you, if you'll let me." Wariness immediately replaced the relaxed expression on James's face. "We don't need charity, Mr. Caldwell. We've managed so far." "It's not charity," Robert said quickly. "It's an opportunity. A fair exchange." James raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Caldwell Tech has a position open for a maintenance supervisor," Robert explained. "It requires someone with mechanical aptitude, problem-solving skills, and the ability to lead a small team. Based on what Michael has told me and what I've observed today, you have all those qualities." "I don't have formal training," James objected, "or credentials." "Skills can be taught, character can't," Robert countered. "And you've demonstrated the kind of character I want in my company. The position includes benefits, of course, health insurance, retirement plan, the usual. And," he hesitated, knowing this next part might be sensitive, "there's company housing available, a townhouse on the property reserved for essential staff. It's not large, but it's comfortable. 2 bedrooms, fully furnished." James's expression was unreadable. "And what would you expect in return?" "Exactly what?" "The job entails maintaining our facilities, supervising the maintenance team, solving problems as they arise." Robert met his gaze directly. "Nothing more, nothing less. This isn't a handout, James. It's a job offer, based on merit." For a long moment, silence hung in the air. Emma looked at her father with wide, hopeful eyes. Michael held his breath, clearly anxious for James to accept. Finally, James spoke. "I'd need to think about it. This is a lot to process in one day." Robert nodded, respecting his caution. "Of course, take all the time you need. The offer stands whenever you're ready." Later that night, after the children had been tucked into bed, Michael in his own room, Emma in the guest suite, Robert found James standing on the back terrace, gazing out at the manicured gardens now silvered by moonlight. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the air fresh and clean. "It's beautiful here," James said without turning around. "Peaceful." Robert joined him at the railing. "Yes, though I'd forgotten that. These past months it's felt more like a prison." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, 2 fathers united by circumstance yet divided by a lifetime of different experiences. "Why are you really offering me this job?" James asked finally. "You don't know me. I could be anyone, a criminal, a drug addict." "Are you?" Robert interrupted. "No," James replied. "But you have no way of knowing that." Robert considered this. "I suppose I'm trusting my instincts and Michael's. He speaks very highly of you." "Kids are easily impressed." "Not my son," Robert said with a small smile. "He's a surprisingly good judge of character. Gets that from his mother." He paused, then added quietly, "But if you want the truth, it's not just gratitude. It's also selfishness." James looked at him, questioning. "Michael needs you," Robert explained. "Both of you. You were there for him when I couldn't be. You helped him when he was lost, not just physically, but emotionally. That creates a bond." He swallowed hard. "I don't want to break that bond just because he's home now. He's been through enough trauma already." Understanding dawned on James's face. "You're not just offering me a job, you're offering us a place in your lives." Robert nodded. "If you want it, no strings attached. If you decide the job isn't right for you, we'll find another solution. But I meant what I said. It's a legitimate position, with fair compensation. James turned back to the view, his profile thoughtful in the moonlight. Emma needs stability, a real home, a good school, opportunities I haven't been able to give her. She could have all of that here, Robert said quietly. And what about you? James asked. What do you get out of this arrangement? Robert considered the question seriously. A second chance, he finally said, at being a father, at life itself. Today I was given a miracle. I don't intend to waste it by returning to my old ways, working obsessively, neglecting what really matters. He looked directly at James. You and Emma remind me of what's important. Maybe I need you as much as Michael does. The moonlight revealed a slight softening in James's expression. I'll think about it. Really think about it. He extended his hand. But whatever I decide about the job, thank you. For not judging us. For treating us like equals, not charity cases. Robert shook his hand firmly. We are equals, James, in all the ways that matter. As they headed back inside, Robert felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For 3 months, he had carried the burden of grief alone, shutting out the world, shutting down his heart. Now in the space of a single day, his world had expanded to include not just his miraculously returned son, but also this man and his daughter, people who had shown him what true generosity looked like. Whatever tomorrow brought, medical examinations, police questions, press inquiries, they would face it together. And for the first time since the accident, Robert Caldwell found himself looking forward to the dawn. The following morning dawned clear and bright, as if the universe had decided that enough tears had been shed. Robert woke early, momentarily, disoriented by the unfamiliar sensation of hope. For a brief, terrifying second, he wondered if yesterday had been a dream, a cruel fabrication of his desperate mind. Then he heard it. Laughter. Children's laughter floating up from downstairs. He followed the sound to the kitchen, where he found Michael and Emma sitting at the counter, both still in pajamas, watching with fascination as Mrs. Hernandez demonstrated how to flip pancakes with a dramatic flourish. "Dad," Michael called when he noticed Robert in the doorway. "Mrs. Hernandez is teaching us to cook. I flipped one all by myself, and it didn't even stick to the ceiling." "A natural talent, Mrs. Hernandez confirmed with a warm smile, the joy of having Michael back evident in her every movement. Unlike his father, who once managed to set water on fire. "That was one time," Robert protested good-naturedly. "And in my defense, there was oil in the pot." Emma giggled, then quickly covered her mouth, as if unsure whether laughing at her host was allowed. Robert gave her a reassuring wink. "Where's your father?" he asked, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Hernandez. "Still sleeping," Emma replied. "He was really tired. We don't usually have beds that soft." Robert nodded, understanding. "Let him rest. Dr. Peterson will be here at 10 to check on Michael, and I imagine the police will arrive sometime after that." At the mention of police, Emma's expression grew worried. Are they going to be mad at Dad for not telling them about Michael right away? Robert sat beside her, choosing his words carefully. "I don't think so. Your father did what he thought was best to protect a child who was scared and confused. I'll make sure they understand that." The tension in her small shoulders eased slightly. "Dad's a good person. He just doesn't trust official people." "I can understand why," Robert said gently. "Sometimes the system that's supposed to help people ends up hurting them instead. But I promise you, Emma, I won't let anyone cause trouble for your father. He brought my son back to me. I owe him everything." Mrs. Hernandez placed a stack of pancakes in front of each child, artfully decorated with strawberries and whipped cream to form smiling faces. "Eat up, niños. Growing children need their strength." As they ate, Robert found himself studying Emma more closely. She had the same resilient spirit he saw in Michael, but there was a wariness about her, a caution born of hard experience. She cut her pancakes into tiny bites, eating slowly, methodically, like someone accustomed to making food last. James appeared a short while later, looking rested but slightly uncomfortable in borrowed clothes. He accepted coffee with gratitude, but declined pancakes, claiming he wasn't hungry. Robert noticed the way his eyes followed his daughter, checking that she was eating, that she was happy. "I've been thinking about your offer," James said quietly, while the children chatted with Mrs. Hernandez about the proper technique for chocolate chip cookies. "I'd like to know more about the job, what it entails exactly." Robert felt a surge of hope. "Of course, we can discuss it in detail after we get through the formalities with the doctor and police, but the short version is that you'd be overseeing all maintenance operations for our main campus, 3 buildings, about 30 acres total, everything from HVAC to electrical, plumbing to basic construction. You'd have a team of 4 reporting to you." James looked doubtful. "I've done all those things, but never in an office setting, and I've never managed people." "You managed to keep a 10-year-old boy with amnesia safe and healthy for 3 weeks, Robert pointed out. "That requires more skill than handling a maintenance team, believe me." Before James could respond, Nancy appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Peterson has arrived, Mr. Caldwell. He's setting up in the study." The medical examination was thorough but gentle. Dr. Peterson, who had been the Caldwell family physician since before Michael was born, showed remarkable patience as he checked the boy for any lingering injuries or complications from his ordeal. "Physically, he's in remarkably good shape," the doctor told Robert afterward, while Michael showed Emma his collection of model ships in the next room. "Some minor malnutrition, which is to be expected, and the head injury has healed well. The amnesia is consistent with trauma, both physical and psychological. His memories should continue to return gradually, though some details may remain permanently lost." "Will he need therapy?" Robert asked. Dr. Peterson nodded. "I'd recommend it. He's been through an extraordinary experience, but children are resilient, and he seems to have formed positive attachments during his time away, which is enormously beneficial." The police interview was similarly considerate. Detective Williams, a compassionate woman with 20 years of experience, spoke with Michael first, then James, focusing on understanding the sequence of events rather than finding fault. "So you found him on the morning of April 12th, she confirmed, making notes as James explained how he had discovered Michael in the sea cave. "Yes, ma'am. The tide was especially low that day. I probably wouldn't have been able to reach that cave otherwise." Detective Williams nodded. "And when you realized he was confused about his identity?" James shifted uncomfortably. "I tried asking around, discreetly, checked the local papers for missing children, but like I explained, when I suggested taking him to the authorities, he became extremely distressed, hyperventilating, crying. I couldn't force that on a child who'd already been through trauma." The detective's expression remained neutral. "And you didn't have access to television or internet to see the wider coverage of Michael's disappearance?" "No, ma'am, we've been living rough, no electricity most days. When I did get access to a newspaper yesterday and saw Mr. Caldwell's photo, I showed it to Michael right away. That's when his memory started coming back." Detective Williams made a final note, then closed her notebook. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Sullivan. I'll need to file a complete report, but from what I can see, you acted in the child's best interest throughout this situation. That's what matters most." Relief washed over James's face. "Thank you, I was worried that your past might complicate things," she finished for him. "I did run a background check when Mr. Caldwell called this morning. Your record shows some minor offenses, but nothing violent, nothing involving children, and nothing recent. People make mistakes, Mr. Sullivan. What matters is what you do next." By late afternoon, the formalities were complete. The story would be released to the press the following day, with a carefully worded statement emphasizing the miraculous reunion and James's role in keeping Michael safe. Robert had already spoken with his legal team to ensure that James would be protected from any potential complications arising from his decision not to immediately report finding Michael. As the sun began to set, Robert found James in the garden, watching Michael and Emma play a game of tag around the fountain. The children's laughter floated on the evening air, a sound so precious that Robert felt his chest tighten with gratitude. "I've decided to accept your offer," James said, without preamble. The job, the housing, all of it. Robert felt a smile spread across his face. I'm glad. But I have conditions, James added firmly. Name them. First, I want to earn my keep. No special treatment. I succeed or fail on my own merits. Robert nodded. Agreed. Second, I want Emma to have opportunities, but I don't want her spoiled. She needs to understand the value of work, of earning what you get. I respect that, Robert said. What else? James turned to face him directly. I want to be clear about our arrangement. I'm grateful for this opportunity, but I won't be beholden to you. I won't be your charity project or your redemption story. That's not what this is about, Robert assured him. Isn't it, James challenged. The rich man whose life is empty despite his wealth, transformed by the poor family with a heart of gold? It's a nice story, but real life is messier than that. Robert considered this. You're right, it is messier. I'm not offering you this job out of pity or to make myself feel better. I'm offering it because I believe you deserve it, and because my son needs you in his life. He paused. But I won't pretend there isn't selfishness involved. Your presence here, both of you, reminds me of what matters, of the person I want to be. James seemed satisfied with this honesty. Then we understand each other. He extended his hand. I accept the position, Mr. Caldwell. Robert, he corrected, shaking James's hand firmly. Robert, James repeated, a small smile finally breaking through his serious demeanor. The transition wasn't without challenges. James and Emma moved into the townhouse on the Caldwell property the following week, a comfortable two-bedroom home with its own small garden, modest by the standards of the estate, but luxurious compared to their previous shelter. Emma marveled at having her own bedroom, decorated in soft blues and greens with a window seat overlooking a flowering magnolia tree. It's like a princess room, she whispered to Michael when he came to visit. I keep thinking someone's going to tell me it's a mistake. It's not a mistake, Michael assured her. Dad says you can stay forever if you want. James began work at Caldwell Tech, where he quickly proved his worth. His practical knowledge and problem-solving abilities more than compensated for his lack of formal training. The maintenance team, initially skeptical of their new supervisor, soon came to respect his hands-on approach and fair management style. Robert, meanwhile, returned to his company with renewed purpose. The board members, who had been considering options for replacing him during his extended absence, were startled by his transformation. The driven but distant CEO was now engaged, focused, and surprisingly balanced. He left the office at reasonable hours, prioritized his son's needs, and brought a new perspective to the business. We've been focused solely on profit for too long, he told the executive team at his first meeting back. It's time we considered our broader impact. I'm proposing a new initiative, a foundation focused on addressing housing insecurity and creating employment opportunities for underserved communities. There were raised eyebrows and skeptical looks, but Robert was undeterred. This isn't just about philanthropy. It's about sustainability, about creating a company that stands for something beyond quarterly returns. The Caldwell Foundation launched 3 months later, with James Sullivan appointed to its advisory board. His first-hand experience with housing insecurity and employment challenges brought invaluable perspective to their programs. The Foundation's first project was a job training center in the neighborhood where James and Emma had lived, offering skills development in technology, construction, and healthcare, fields with genuine career paths. As summer turned to fall, the children settled into a new routine. Michael returned to his private school, while Emma enrolled in the same institution on a scholarship Robert had quietly arranged. Initially shy and overwhelmed by the wealth of her classmates, Emma soon found her footing, her intelligence and determination earning her both academic success and friendships. The weekends became a time for family activities, all 4 of them together, exploring Portland's museums, hiking in the nearby forests, or sailing on the calm waters of Casco Bay. Michael's confidence on the water gradually returned, especially with James's steady presence aboard. The seasoned dockworker knew the moods of the ocean intimately, and taught both children to respect its power without fearing it. One crisp October evening, as they returned from a sailing expedition, Robert watched as James patiently showed the children how to properly stow the equipment, explaining the importance of caring for their tools. "My dad never taught me these things," Robert commented as they walked back to the house. "He was always working, building his business. By the time he had money for boats and fancy equipment, he was too busy to use them himself." James glanced at him. "Is that why you work so hard? Following his example?" Robert considered this. "Partly, and partly because I thought success was measured by the size of your bank account or the scope of your influence." He watched Michael and Emma race ahead, engaged in some imaginary game. "I was wrong." "Money matters," James said pragmatically. "Believe me, I know that better than most, but it's not everything." "No," Robert agreed, "it's not everything." That night, after the children were asleep, Robert sat on the terrace with a glass of scotch, contemplating how completely his life had changed in just a few months, from the depths of despair to this unexpected happiness, from isolation to connection, from emptiness to purpose. He heard the door open behind him and turned to see James approaching with his own glass. "Mind if I join you?" the other man asked. Robert gestured to the chair beside him. "Please." They sat in companionable silence, for a while watching the stars emerge in the clear autumn sky. "Emma asked me something interesting today," James said eventually. "She wanted to know if we're a family now." Robert felt a catch in his throat. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who's there for you when you need them most." James took a sip of his drink. "Was that wrong?" "No," Robert said softly. "That sounds exactly right to me." The two men clinked glasses, sealing an unspoken agreement. They were indeed a family now, unconventional, unexpected, but stronger together than apart. Through the most unlikely of circumstances, they had found not just shelter or employment, but belonging. As Robert gazed up at the stars, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the miracle of his son's return, for the twist of fate that had brought James and Emma into their lives, and for the second chance he had been given, not just to be a father, but to be a better man. The universe, it seemed, had a strange way of bringing people together. Sometimes it took losing everything to find what truly mattered. Winter descended on Portland with a vengeance that year, bringing record snowfalls and bitter cold. The Caldwell estate transformed into a winter wonderland, its grounds blanketed in pristine white, icicles hanging like crystal decorations from the eaves. For Michael and Emma it was magical. Endless snowball fights, sledding down the gentle slope behind the main house, and hot chocolate with Mrs. Hernandez afterward, who insisted that her secret recipe could cure any chill. But the harsh weather brought challenges as well, particularly for the newly established Caldwell Foundation. The homeless shelter they had opened in October was consistently over capacity, and the job training center struggled as potential participants battled transportation, difficulties in the snowy conditions. "We need a more comprehensive approach," Robert said during a foundation board meeting in early December. "Temporary shelter isn't enough. People need stable housing, especially during winter." James, who had been quiet throughout most of the discussion, finally spoke up. "There's an abandoned apartment building on Cumberland Avenue. Solid structure, but it's been vacant for years due to code violations. With the right resources, it could be renovated and turned into transitional housing." The board members exchanged skeptical glances. Purchasing and renovating a building would require significantly more investment than their current programs. "Do you have a specific property in mind?" Robert asked, intrigued. James nodded. "The old Blackwell building. 6 stories, 30 units. Last I heard, the bank was looking to offload it after foreclosure. They'd probably take a reasonable offer just to get it off their books." Robert made a note. "I'll have our real estate team look into it tomorrow. If it's viable, we could have renovations underway by January." One of the board members, a longtime business associate of Robert's, cleared his throat. "Robert, while I admire your enthusiasm, this seems like an overly ambitious project for a foundation that's barely 3 months old. Perhaps we should focus on establishing our current programs, before expanding. "People are freezing on the streets, Howard," Robert replied firmly. "I'm not willing to wait for the perfect timing when lives are at stake." After the meeting, as they walked back to their respective homes on the estate, James gave Robert a sidelong glance. "You've changed, you know." "How so?" "6 months ago, would you have dismissed the concerns of a major shareholder so easily, over a project with no immediate profit potential?" Robert considered this. Probably not. But 6 months ago, I hadn't experienced what it means to truly lose everything that matters. He paused. Or to find it again, thanks to someone who had every reason to think only of himself, but chose compassion instead. James looked embarrassed by the praise. "I just did what anyone would do." "There's that phrase again," Robert said with a small smile. "And I still disagree. Not everyone would have opened their home to a stranger's child, especially when that home was hardly more than 4 walls and a leaky roof." "Speaking of home," James said, changing the subject, "Emma wants to know if we're still doing Christmas together. She's been working on something for Michael, but she's not sure if we're intruding on your family tradition." Robert stopped walking, turning to face James directly. "You are our family tradition now. Of course we're celebrating Christmas together. Unless—" he hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "Unless you'd prefer to have your own celebration." James shook his head. "No, that's not it. It's just, Emma and I haven't really done Christmas properly in years. No money for presents, no proper tree. I don't want her to feel like we're charity cases at your fancy Christmas." "Then we'll do something different this year," Robert decided. "Something that honors both our traditions. Something new that belongs to all of us." And so began the planning for what the children would later dub the best Christmas ever. Rather than the formal, catered affairs Robert had hosted in previous years, events that were more about business connections than genuine celebration, they created something personal and meaningful. The children decorated the main house and the townhouse with handmade ornaments, paper chains and pine boughs collected from the estate grounds. Mrs. Hernandez taught Emma her secret recipes, while Michael and James constructed an elaborate train set that circled the massive tree in the main hall. Robert, to everyone's surprise, revealed an unexpected talent for woodworking, crafting personalized gifts in the small workshop behind the garage. As Christmas Eve approached, the excitement in both households was palpable. Emma had taken to spending her afternoons in the main house kitchen with Mrs. Hernandez, working on a special project that required much whispering and shooing away of curious onlookers. Michael, meanwhile, had been making mysterious trips to the art room at school, returning with paint-splattered clothes and a secretive smile. The transformation in both children over these months was remarkable. Michael's nightmares about the accident had gradually diminished, though he still occasionally woke calling for his father. The gaps in his memory had mostly filled in, though some details of his time adrift remained mercifully blank. He had returned to his previous academic excellence, but with a new appreciation for practical skills learned from James, fixing things, working with his hands, understanding how the physical world operated. Emma, too, had blossomed. Initially, overwhelmed by her new school and surroundings, she had gradually found her footing, her natural intelligence and determination earning her both academic recognition and genuine friendships. She still maintained some of her cautious habits, eating, slowly saving scraps, keeping her most treasured possessions carefully hidden away. But she had begun to trust that this new stability might actually last. 2 days before Christmas, Portland was hit with the worst blizzard in decades. Wind howled across the estate, snow piled in drifts against doors and windows, and the power flickered ominously before finally failing completely just after midnight. Robert was awakened by Michael climbing into his bed, shivering more from fear than cold. "The heat's gone," his son whispered, "and it's so dark." "It's just a power outage," Robert reassured him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "The emergency generator should kick in soon." But when morning came, the generator had failed as well, a victim of the extreme cold. The main house, with its high ceilings and large windows, was rapidly becoming uninhabitable. Robert called James, relieved to find that the smaller townhouse was maintaining heat better, thanks to its more modest size and newer insulation. "Bring Michael over," James suggested. "We've got the wood stove going. It's not fancy, but it's warm." Bundled. In layers of winter gear, Robert and Michael made their way through the knee-deep snow to the townhouse. Inside, they found a scene of surprising coziness. The wood stove in the living room radiated heat. Emma was setting a breakfast table with mismatched dishes, and James was cooking something that smelled delicious on a camping stove set up on the kitchen counter. "Welcome to survival mode," James greeted them with a grin. "Hope you like pancakes cooked on propane." "How did you get prepared so quickly?" Robert asked, shedding his snow-covered coat. James shrugged. "Old habits. I always keep emergency supplies. Never know when the power might go out or the money might run short." He flipped a perfectly browned pancake onto a plate. "Emma, show Michael where to put his wet things." As the children disappeared into the back of the house, Robert took in the practical efficiency of James's preparations. The living room had been transformed into a cozy nest of blankets and cushions around the wood stove. Candles and battery-powered lanterns provided light. A bucket collected snow from the windowsill, melting it for washing water. It was a stark contrast to Robert's own response to the outage, which had mainly involved frustrated calls to service providers who couldn't get through the storm anyway. "I feel rather useless," Robert admitted, accepting a mug of coffee. "All my resources, and I couldn't even keep my son warm this morning." "Different skill sets," James said simply. "You know how to run a multinational corporation. I know how to survive when systems fail. Both have value." By afternoon, it became clear that power wouldn't be restored anytime soon. The storm had crippled much of the state's infrastructure, and emergency services were focused on life-threatening situations. The four of them settled into an unexpected adventure, with James teaching the children how to play poker using buttons as chips, while Robert discovered the surprising satisfaction of cooking a simple meal over an open flame. As night fell and the storm continued to rage outside, they gathered around the wood stove, wrapped in blankets, telling stories by candlelight. To Robert's surprise, it was the most content he had felt in years, perhaps since Emily was alive. There was something primal and comforting about huddling together against the elements, stripped of the usual technological buffers that separated modern humans from the natural world. "Dad used to tell the best ghost stories when we had blackouts," Emma said, leaning against James's shoulder. "The kind that made me hide under the blankets but still want to hear more." "Your dad is full of surprising talents," Robert commented, catching James's eye over the children's heads. "Oh, he can do all kinds of things," Emma continued proudly. "He can fix anything, and he knows which plants you can eat in the forest, and he can predict the weather by looking at the sky." Michael looked up at Robert. "What about you, Dad? What can you do?" The question caught Robert off guard. What could he do, really? Without his wealth, his company, his position, strip away all the external trappings of success, and what remained? "Your father is one of the smartest people I've ever met," James answered when Robert hesitated. "He sees solutions where others see problems. He takes care of people. Not just his own family, but strangers too. That's a rare gift." Robert felt an unexpected lump in his throat at this generous assessment. "And," James added with a hint of mischief, "he makes surprisingly good coffee for a rich guy." The children giggled, and the moment of vulnerability passed. But something had shifted in Robert's perception, both of himself and of the man who had become such an integral part of their lives. The storm lasted 3 days, during which they remained snug in the townhouse, playing games, reading books by flashlight, and learning to appreciate simple pleasures. When the power finally returned late on Christmas Eve, there was an almost tangible sense of disappointment among the children. "Do we have to go back to the big house now?" Michael asked, reluctance clear in his voice. Robert looked around at the townhouse, which had begun to feel more like home than his grand mansion ever had. "Not right away," he decided. "I think we can stay for Christmas if James and Emma don't mind the company." Emma clapped her hands in delight. "Yes, we can all open presents together in the morning." And so Christmas morning found them still in the townhouse, gathered around a small but perfect tree that James and Michael had cut from the estate grounds. The presents were fewer and simpler than Robert would have traditionally provided, but somehow more meaningful. Emma proudly presented Michael with a handmade cookbook filled with Mrs. Hernandez's recipes, painstakingly copied in her neat handwriting, illustrated with her own drawings. For Robert, she had crafted a frame from polished driftwood containing a photo James had taken of all four of them sailing last summer. "So you remember that we're a family now," she explained shyly. Michael's gifts were equally heartfelt. A detailed painting of the lighthouse where he had reunited with his father for James, and a bracelet woven from colorful threads for Emma, matching one he wore himself. "Friendship bracelets," he explained, "so we're connected even when we're at different parts of school." James had repaired and restored an antique pocket watch for Robert, Emily's father's timepiece that had been damaged years ago and tucked away in a drawer. For the children, he had built an elaborate dollhouse-sized replica of the townhouse, complete with tiny furniture and working lights. Robert's gifts, too, reflected this new emphasis on meaning over monetary value. For James, he had crafted a chess set, each piece carefully carved by hand during late nights in the workshop. For Emma, a series of first-edition books by her favorite author, discovered after weeks of searching through antiquarian bookshops. And for Michael, a handmade scrapbook documenting their family's journey, from the newspaper headlines about the accident to photos of their summer sailing adventures, the foundation's opening day, and candid shots of their blended families' everyday moments. As they sat amid the discarded wrapping paper, enjoying hot chocolate and the cinnamon rolls Emma and Mrs. Hernandez had prepared days earlier, Robert looked around at these people who had become his family. His son, healthy and happy again. Emma, blossoming in her new environment. And James, a man who had started as a stranger but had become something closer to a brother. "I have one more announcement," Robert said when the gift opening was complete. "It's not exactly a Christmas present, but I wanted you all to be the first to know." Three curious faces turned toward him. "The foundation has purchased the Blackwell building," he continued. "Renovations begin next month. By spring, we'll have transitional housing for 30 families currently in shelters or unstable housing situations." James looked stunned. "You actually did it? Even with the board's concerns?" Robert nodded. "Sometimes you have to follow your conscience, not the consensus. You taught me that, James." He paused. "Actually, there's more. The foundation needs a director, someone who understands firsthand the challenges these families face, who has practical skills and genuine empathy." Understanding dawned on James's face. "Are you offering me the job?" "If you want it," Robert confirmed. "It would mean leaving your position at Caldwell Tech, but I think your talents would be better utilized helping people rebuild their lives than fixing office heating systems." For a moment, James was speechless, emotions playing across his usually composed features. I don't know what to say. I'm not qualified to run a foundation." "You're exactly qualified," Robert disagreed. "You have lived experience, practical knowledge, and the respect of the community we're trying to serve. The rest, the administrative details, the financial management, you can learn. I'll help you." Emma was practically bouncing with excitement. "Does this mean Dad would be helping people like we used to be, finding them homes and jobs?" "Exactly," Robert nodded. "And it means both of you would be making a difference for families going through what you experienced." James looked at his daughter, then back at Robert. "I'd like some time to think about it. It's a big change." "Of course," Robert agreed. "The offer stands whenever you're ready." As the day continued with games and stories and more food than they could possibly eat, Robert found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the depths of despair at Michael's memorial service to this moment of contentment and purpose. From isolation to connection. From emptiness to fulfillment. The storm outside had finally ceased, leaving a world transformed by snow, familiar landscapes made new and beautiful by its pristine covering. Much like their lives, Robert thought, the foundations remained the same, but everything had been transformed by the unexpected blizzard that had blown through their existence, leaving nothing quite as it was before. And he wouldn't have it any other way. Spring arrived in Portland with a gentle persistence, melting away the last vestiges of the brutal winter. The Blackwell building, now renamed Hope Haven, was nearing completion after months of intensive renovation. What had once been a dilapidated eyesore was now a dignified residence, its brick facade restored, windows gleaming in the April sunshine, and a small community garden taking shape in what had previously been a trash-strewn lot. James Sullivan stood on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, directing a team of workers as they installed playground equipment in the side yard. 6 months. Into his role as director of the Caldwell Foundation, he had found his calling. The transition hadn't been without challenges. There were still board members who questioned his qualifications, community partners who initially dismissed him, and the endless bureaucratic hurdles of permits, zoning, and funding allocations. But James approached each obstacle with the same practical determination that had characterized his entire life. "The swing set needs to be another 3 feet from the fence," he called to the installation crew. "We need a clear safety zone around each piece of equipment." From across the yard, Emma waved to get his attention, proudly pointing to the mural she and several other children were painting on the playground wall. At 12, she had become the unofficial youth ambassador for the foundation, bridging the gap between the adults making decisions and the children whose lives would be most directly affected. James gave her a thumbs up, marveling at how confident his daughter had become. Gone was the timid girl who had once been afraid to speak up in class, who had hidden her intelligence behind a wall of silence built from years of insecurity. Now she debated environmental policy at the dinner table, organized book drives for the Foundation's education program, and had recently been elected class president at her school. His phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Meeting running late. We'll head straight to the lighthouse. Meet you there at 5. James texted back a quick confirmation, then returned to his inspection of the playground installation. Today marked exactly 1 year since Michael's return, 1 year since that rainy evening when Emma had approached Robert outside the memorial service, clutching a small sneaker and carrying news that would change all their lives. They had decided to commemorate the day with a visit to Porter Point Lighthouse, the place where father and son had reunited, not a sad remembrance, but a celebration of second chances and new beginnings. At precisely 5 o'clock, James and Emma arrived at the lighthouse, finding Robert and Michael already waiting at the bench overlooking the bay. The scene was dramatically different from that rainy evening a year ago. Today the sky was clear blue, the water sparkled in the late afternoon sun, and sailboats dotted the horizon. "Sorry we're late," James called as they approached. Emma insisted on finishing the mural before we left. "It's going to be the best playground in Portland," Emma announced proudly, "maybe in all of Maine." Michael, who had shot up several inches over the past year and was beginning to lose his childish roundness, grinned at her enthusiasm. "Did you add the rocket ship like I suggested?" "Better," Emma replied. "It's a rocket ship that transforms into a submarine for space and ocean exploration." Robert smiled at their exchange, then gestured to a picnic basket sitting on the bench. "Mrs. Hernandez sent provisions. She said we're all too skinny." The 4 of them settled onto blankets spread on the grassy area beside the lighthouse. As they unpacked the elaborate picnic, fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, and Mrs. Hernandez's famous apple turnovers, Robert raised a thermos cup in a toast. "To found family," he said simply. "To second chances," James added. The children clinked their cups against the adults, the simple ritual acknowledging the extraordinary journey that had brought them together. As they ate, Michael recounted the latest developments in his ongoing science project, a study of tidal patterns that had been inspired by his experience. With James's help, he had constructed a series of sensors to be placed at various points along the shoreline, collecting data that would be analyzed as part of his school's regional science competition. Dr. Wheaton says if we can gather enough data, it might actually help with predicting dangerous conditions, he explained excitedly, like the kind that caused our accident. A year ago, such a casual reference to the event that had nearly separated them forever would have been unthinkable. Now, while still significant, it had been integrated into their shared history, a turning point rather than an ending. "That's impressive, buddy," James said, genuine pride in his voice. turning your experience into something that could help others. Robert nodded agreement. Your mother would be incredibly proud of you. She always believed in using knowledge to make a difference. The mention of Emily no longer brought the sharp pain it once had. Her memory remained a cherished presence in their lives, but the grief had softened into something bittersweet rather than devastating. After they had eaten, Robert suggested a walk to the point, where a trail wound along the cliffs overlooking the ocean. As the children ran ahead, skipping stones into the water and debating the merits of various superhero powers, the two men fell into step beside each other. "Have you thought any more about my proposal?" Robert asked after a comfortable silence. James nodded slowly. "I have, and I'm still not sure it's the right move." 3 weeks earlier, Robert had suggested a significant expansion of the Foundation's work, establishing similar transitional housing programs in 3 additional cities across New England, with James taking on a regional leadership role. It would mean more responsibility, more travel, and a substantial salary increase. "You're the perfect person for it," Robert pressed gently. "You've proven yourself with Hope Haven. The board is impressed with what you've accomplished, even Howard, who was your biggest skeptic." James picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the calm surface of a tidal pool. "It's not about whether I can do it. It's about whether I should." "What do you mean?" "Emma's doing so well here. She has friends. She's thriving at school. More travel would mean less time with her." James hesitated. "And there's Michael to consider too." Robert looked surprised. "Michael?" "He's come to rely on our arrangement," James explained carefully. "Our family dinners, our weekend activities, me being there when you have late meetings or business trips. If I take on this bigger role, that would change." Understanding dawned on Robert's face. "You're worried about destabilizing what we've built." "Exactly. It took us a year to find this balance, to become—" James searched for the right word. "Whatever we are." "Family," Robert supplied simply. "We're family, James. Unconventional, perhaps, but family nonetheless." James nodded. "And that's worth protecting, worth more than a promotion or a bigger paycheck." They walked in silence for a moment, watching as Emma showed Michael how to catch small crabs in the tidal pools, her movements confident and precise. "What if there was another option?" Robert said finally. "One that would allow you to expand your impact without sacrificing our family structure?" James raised an eyebrow, waiting. "We could base the regional headquarters here in Portland," Robert suggested. "Build a proper administrative center adjacent to Hope Haven. You'd still need to travel occasionally to the other sites, but the bulk of your work could remain local." "That would require significant investment," James pointed out. "Real estate in that neighborhood isn't cheap, especially now that the area is being revitalized." Robert smiled. "Fortunately, I happen to know someone with the resources to make that investment. Someone who believes that family and community are worth every penny." Before James could respond, they were interrupted by excited shouts from the children, who had discovered a small cave exposed by the low tide. "Dad!" "James, come look," Michael called, waving them over. "It's like the one where James found me." The men exchanged a glance, both recognizing the significance of this moment. They joined the children at the cave entrance, where Emma was already, shining her phone flashlight into the shadowy interior. "It's much smaller than yours was," she told Michael, "but cool." As the children explored the shallow cave, careful to stay within sight, Robert turned to James. "Think about my proposal. No pressure, no deadline. Whatever you decide, we'll make it work. That's what families do." James nodded, watching as Emma showed Michael how to identify different types of seaweed clinging to the cave walls. "I will, and thank you for understanding what matters." "I had good teachers," Robert replied simply, glancing meaningfully at James and the children. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the water, they gathered once more at the bench where Michael had waited for his father a year ago. The lighthouse keeper had arrived to illuminate the beacon for the night, and they watched as the powerful beam swept across the darkening sea. "I have something for each of you," Robert said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "A small token to mark this anniversary." He handed each of them a small velvet pouch. Inside, they found identical silver pendants shaped like a lighthouse, with a tiny blue stone set at the top where the light would be. To remind us of where our journey together began, Robert explained, and to serve as a beacon calling us home should we ever feel lost. Emma immediately put hers on, the pendant gleaming against her t-shirt. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching it reverently. Michael studied his thoughtfully before slipping it around his neck. Like our own private symbol. James held his in his palm for a moment, feeling the weight of all it represented, before carefully placing it around his neck as well. "Thank you," he said simply, the words conveying far more than mere gratitude. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, they reluctantly gathered their belongings to head home. The children walked ahead again, Emma demonstrating a complex, clapping game she had learned at school, Michael attempting to follow her rapid movements. "She's good for him," Robert observed. "Brings him out of his shell. He was always so cautious before, so careful not to make mistakes." "And he's good for her," James replied. "Shows her it's okay to enjoy life, to have nice things without guilt, to dream big." "They balance each other," Robert agreed, "like us in a way." James considered this. "I suppose they do. Your vision and resources, my practical experience, your generosity, my caution. We make a good team." "The best," Robert confirmed. As they reached the parking lot, Emma suddenly stopped and pointed toward the horizon. "Look, a shooting star!" They all paused, gazing upward as a brilliant streak of light arced across the darkening sky. "Make a wish," Michael said, closing his eyes tightly. Emma did the same, her expression one of intense concentration. The men exchanged amused glances but followed suit, each silently formulating a wish before the shooting star faded from view. "What did you wish for?" Michael asked Emma as they resumed walking. She shook her head firmly. "Can't tell or it won't come true, everyone knows that." "I'll tell you mine," Michael offered. "I wished that we'd stay like this forever, all of us together." Emma looked scandalized. "Now it won't come true." "Actually," James said, placing a hand on her shoulder, "I think that's one wish that doesn't need magic to come true. Just commitment and love, and we have plenty of both." Robert nodded agreement. "Some wishes we make happen ourselves through our choices and actions every day." As they drove back toward Portland, the children eventually dozed off in the back seat, leaning against each other in the familiar comfort of long friendship. James glanced in the rearview mirror at their peaceful faces, then at Robert beside him. "I'll take the regional position," he said quietly. "If we can structure it the way you suggested." Robert smiled, unsurprised. "I knew you would. Your capacity to help others is too great to be limited to just one project." "But family comes first," James added firmly. "Always." "Always," Robert agreed. They drove in companionable silence for a while, the lighthouse beam visible in the distance behind them, sweeping across the night sky like a tangible reminder of their journey. "What did you wish for?" James asked eventually. "When you saw the shooting star?" Robert considered for a moment before answering. "I wished for the wisdom to never again take for granted what truly matters." He glanced at the sleeping children in the back seat, then at James. "To remember every day that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or assets, but in connections, in belonging." James nodded, understanding perfectly. "A worthy wish." "And you?" Robert asked. "What did you wish for?" James kept his eyes on the road, but a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "That's easy. I wished for exactly what we already have. Because a year ago, I couldn't have imagined any of this was possible." As they pulled into the driveway of the estate, the main house and the townhouse both glowed with welcoming light. Mrs. Hernandez had left lamps on in the windows, a simple gesture that transformed buildings into homes. Home. Such a simple word for such a profound concept. A year ago, Robert had owned a mansion but lost his sense of home when he thought he had lost his son. James and Emma had created a home out of scavenged materials and love, proving that home wasn't about the structure but about the connection it housed. Now they had all found home in each other, in this unconventional family, formed through tragedy and chance, strengthened by compassion and understanding, and sustained by a love that transcended conventional boundaries. As they carried the sleeping children inside, each to their own bed in houses separated by just a short garden path, Robert and James exchanged a final glance of perfect understanding. No words were needed to express what they both knew with absolute certainty. They had all been lost in their different ways. And against all odds, they had found not just each other but themselves, their best selves in the process. Sometimes the greatest storms of our lives lead us to exactly where we need to be, even when we can't see the destination through the darkness. And sometimes the truest family is the one we find when we're most lost. The lighthouse beam swept across the night sky once more, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light always returns. And with it, the promise of a new day, a new beginning, a new chance to appreciate the miracle of connection that makes us truly human. Dear listeners, we hope that the journey of Robert, Michael, James, and Emma has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. Their story reminds us that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our deepest losses, and that family can be found in the most unexpected places. If this tale of second chances and unconventional families resonated with you, we've prepared a special playlist of equally moving stories that explore the depths of human connection. You'll find it by clicking the link to your left. Did this story bring tears to your eyes or warm your heart? Let us know in the comments below. Your reactions and thoughts mean the world to us and help shape the stories we bring to you in the future. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button if you enjoyed this journey. Every day, we bring you unique narratives that explore the complexity and beauty of life's unexpected turns. Until our next story together, remember that sometimes the most meaningful connections arise from life's most challenging moments. We look forward to reading your comments.